This tutorial is about dealing with high-res footage. So sometimes 4K footage isn't a lot of fun to work with. And say if we're only going to be tracking this cup, it seems kind of wasteful that we'll be doing compositing in this area, but all these other pixels will be used in a lot of compositing operations. So I'll show you the trick that I always use. You do a loose track on the cup, you crop the composition, you do your compositing inside of the crop composition, and then you track it back to the main footage. It's way easier than it sounds. I'll add lockdown. The first thing I'll do is a very rough track around what I'm planning on compositing. So I'll take this finger here because that's a pretty obvious piece of texture, scroll to the very end, make another adjustment point here, and I just want to loosely track this cup. It doesn't have to be perfect. And we're done. Good enough. Let's select this point and externalize it and copy the keyframes. At this point, we're actually going to delete lockdown because we're going to prep this for any compositing, not just tracking, to make everything much faster. I'll go to the anchor point and I'm going to paste these keyframes on the anchor point, and you'll notice now this shot is loosely position stabilized around the cup. I'm going to duplicate this layer, and on the bottom one, just kill the keyframes. We'll use this later. Then I'm going to use my region of interest tool and draw a border loosely around the cup. This is what we're going to crop down to make compositing easier. As we scrub along, we just have to make sure the cup never really leaves this frame. Scoot that over a little bit. Maybe we can close it in a little more on this side. And this looks good. So I'm going to copy these anchor point keyframes again, and then go to Composition, Crop Comp to Region of Interest. I'm going to take this stabilized piece of footage, pre-compose it moving all attributes into the new comp, and now I need to make this main composition normal and sane. So I'm going to take this footage and parent it back to the original, and I'll set the composition size to whatever the original was, 3840 by 2160. Let's just take down the opacity here so it's easier to see what's going on. So right now the cup isn't attached to the original footage, but at least it's synced up on the first frame. We can reset the position and the anchor point, and now this is back in place. So to get this to follow, we can create a new null object and paste the anchor point keyframes into the position here. Now, we only had parented this because when we move this, we wanted this to move along with it. At this point, it makes no sense for this to be parented to something that's not moving. We can parent this to the null, and now this is going to be moving along. Let's move into this composition, and this is where we'll actually be doing our work. I can pre-compose this, moving all attributes into the new comp. And let's talk about what we've gained here. So this resolution is 772 by 896. So this small composition only has 691,000 pixels in it. The full 4K has 8 million. That means for whatever effects we choose, whether it's lockdown or not, any per pixel operation should render about 11 times faster. I've used this step my entire career to speed things up with tracking and compositing, shrinking down the area of focus to a much smaller pixel count to make every single effect you stack on there much faster. So let's actually prove this. I'll go to Effect, Camera Lens Blur, and bring up the blur radius to about 25. So we're getting about half a second. Hit or miss, we're at around 500 milliseconds. Then we'll copy this effect and go to the full 4K, paste it. I'll only make you sit through this once, this render bar. And it's a little over 5 seconds. So pretty clear and obvious. It's taking about 10 times as long to render the 4K as it is the crop. And you're going to gain benefit from cropping with every single effect that you stack on there. And that was the whole point of this tutorial, is to try to crop before you start compositing. Well, with that said, we might as well go ahead and track this cup and put something on there. So let's return to our regularly scheduled tutorial. Although you've probably seen this before in other tutorials, so I'll be very fast about it. So this looks like it tracked okay. So I'm actually going to skip the tracking part of this tutorial because I have so many other tutorials that cover it. In this shot is pretty easy. A lot of you seem to prefer short tutorials with all new information, so I hope that's okay. I'm going to jump right back into After Effects. Check out more tracking tutorials on our homepage. Good enough. Let's press lockdown. Inside of this stabilized comp, we'll remove the checkerboard and that background that's not necessary. And I have a logo we can slap in here. Good enough. I'm going to take my layer with lockdown on it, make it not a guide layer, pre-compose moving all attributes into the new comp. That way when we put effects or masks on it, it behaves predictably as if it's footage. I'll duplicate the layer, and I think I'm just going to do some keying for this. I'll use Composite Brush, clicking and dragging on the colors that I want to key, alt-clicking and dragging on the fingers, which I don't want to key. I'll set this to Stencil Alpha. Still just kind of alt-clicking in those areas that the key might have missed. I'll put on a slight choke and a slight blur. And this coffee cup is probably way too sharp. I'll set this to overlay and maybe desaturate it a little. Last thing I'm going to do is make a solid over the top of everything. And I'm just going to keep this cropped around the logo. Turn this on and set it to Stencil Alpha. And that can help with any little weird border problems we might have. I'll put a little feather on there too. And in this comp, you can see that's pretty well tracked on there. Let's go out into the main comp and see this at full res. And here it is. So while I was here, I did track more of this shot, adding some flowers to her shirt and the logo to her undershirt. This is what the mesh looks like. I know some of you always ask to see the mesh. And to generate the masks for this, I just use Composite Brush inside of the stabilized pre-comp. So without going through this whole process, I'm going to solo this layer here and remove the effect. I'll add Composite Brush, and if we wanted to make a mask for the blue here, click and drag all over the blue, alt-click and drag over what is not blue, set the matte type to soft 1.6, and eventually with enough clicking and dragging, you can get a pretty good mask out of this. And then of course there's choking, blurring, and additional filtering if you'd like it. I'm going to delete the brush data, just show you that we can get a mask for the undershirt too. For the cup, well, you get the general idea. Thanks for watching. For more info, check out aescripts.com/lockdown.